Good morning once again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this training session. My name is Oladotun Oyemi. I'll get to more of the introduction very soon, but I want to let us know that today's training is going to be enlightening. I intend to ensure that it's enlightening, that you leave here learning something. So today we're going to be looking at the topic data protection. What is it really about? Um, there's been a lot of rave about it in recent times. Does it concern me? Is it something I have to pay attention to? We all have like responsibilities to take this knowledge back to our organizations and implement them because as we go on, we'll find out that data protection really concerns each and every one of us. It's not just the responsibility of some group of people, maybe the privacy professionals or maybe the lawyers. It doesn't concern you. You find out that it really does concern you, and you have a lot of role to play within your organization as regards to data protection. So we'll look at the basics because this is an introductory course. We would look a little bit into some of the regulations and we'll be narrowing down to Nigeria today because we don't want it to get too complicated. So we'll just look at the Nigerian law around data protection and maybe a few examples around, how this really applies and what we can take away from it. So thank you for that. Um, so now, a little bit about me. My name is Oladotun, as I already mentioned. I am Yoruba by tribe from Nigeria, obviously. And privacy professional certification I took is a global certification. So that means everywhere I go, um, I am still certified. So it's not a Nigerian certification. Then my area of specialty is around data protection. Even though I'm a lawyer called to the Nigerian bar, I specialize in data protection, data health, and pretty much policy analysis because I work as a policy analyst. Um, I'm passionate about ensuring that everyone I meet is aware of the privacy rights and data protection obligations, depending on which side of the divide you fall. Privacy rights, if you're a data subject, that means you and I. Data protection obligations, if you're an organization, typically called a data controller and a data processor. So any organization that processes personal data or that has a responsibility in the processing of personal data, you either fall into the category of a data controller or a data processor. So that way I can let you know that, okay, these and these are your obligations. But if you're on the other side, which everyone is actually, because we all have personal data, that's the side of the data subject. I will let you know your rights as a data subject and pretty much that. So I've been into privacy since 2021, pretty much 2020, but fully 2021. I held my very first training on data protection in 2021. That was just coming out of the lockdown season. That was when I had my very first training. So it's something I have been doing for a bit, at least 2 years. And I am very, very interested in ensuring that you understand today. So beyond me just holding this session, I won't leave I won't live fulfilled if I don't know that I have been able to impact you or increase your knowledge on this topic. Then maybe a little bit of a fun fact. I have a second level proficiency in Chinese. So I studied Chinese a bit on a personal level because I was just interested. So now let's get to it. Yeah. Okay. So today we'll be looking at the concept of data, personal data and data protection. How does it really concern you? What are the laws about it, or what does the law say about it? What are your rights as a data subject? I already explained that a data subject is anyone whose data is being processed, or anyone, pretty much everyone actually, because everyone has personal data. So everyone is a data subject in some right. And we'll discuss some scenarios around it or some situations that actually happen and just get feedback from everyone how you feel about it and everything like that. So truthfully, companies have been collecting data since way back, as far back as companies existed. But in recent times, it has become even more prevalent. It has become more intentional. And that's because we have, everyone pivoting into technology. Almost every service you can render physically can be done digitally as well. So there is an heavy use of technology, and that requires data to thrive. Use of personal data, because personal data is your personal identifier online, or a digital identifier that can be used to say, okay, this and this is this so person. So what then is personal data? We've been saying personal data, we've been saying data protection, but what really is personal data? So there are four ways to identify personal data, and the four steps, or the four items you see on your screen, they are conjunctive. So you can't separate them. They have to go all hand in hand for it to actually be personal data. So personal data is any information. Think of any information that comes to mind at all. Any information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual, directly or indirectly. That's a simple definition of personal data. So as I explained further, I want you to begin to picture any information. Any information, that's anything that relates to, that means it has to point to someone, it has to, give a description about someone. Someone then comes as a third, level of the definition. The person has to be identified or identifiable. So that means that the person must be someone that we know at the time, or someone that we can, add information together to identify. So even if the data or the information relating to a person is not something that we can say that, okay, this is this and this person at this time. But if it's something that we can actually put a couple of information together and identify the person, then it's going to still be personal data. Then you now, have the fourth part of it, that's directly or indirectly. So means that the information relating to an identified or identifiable person or individual, directly or indirectly. So you see some of the examples in that column are things that you would not typically think is personal data, because they don't relate to you directly, or maybe you can't just be walking on the road and somebody calls, oh, 45.33442, which is maybe an IP address, and is trying to reach you. You're trying to call, hello, 45.33552. No, it's not a direct information, but it's an information that relates to you, an identifiable person indirectly. So by the time we put a couple of information together, we'd actually be able to identify that this MacBook belongs to this person, this laptop belongs to this person, this activity online was carried out by this person. So let's look at some of the examples we have. Any information. So the simple examples which we see every day is maybe when HR wants to collect data, they'll ask you for your name, your house address, your date of birth, your state of origin, your mother's maiden name. All of these are personal data, because they are all information that relates to you and can be used to identify you directly in this case. We have the name, the date of birth, your tax identification number, your NIN, your bank verification number, your BVN, as okay, that's bank verification, your voter's ID. So all of these are personal data. And what that means, or why I want you to, note this as we go on, is to identify how important it now becomes to protect this personal data. Because when there's a wrong access to this information, that means somebody else can go somewhere else and identify as you, or somebody else can use this data in a way that you have not approved, or in a way that is not okay with you. For example, somebody else comes on this call with the same name, Oladotun Oweyemi, and maybe when Olawale says, oh, Dotun, you have the floor, and the person unmutes and starts speaking, and then we're trying to identify who really is Oladoto Oyemi, because most of the people on the call joined the call not really knowing who Oladoto Oyemi is. So you begin to see that that's my personal data. So there is a way that information should be used that should not, bring prejudice to me, or should be something I have consented to. Or somebody, comes on the call and has the what's it called? The image icon where you can see, for example, can see someone with the R, and maybe has my picture as their own image and put the name Oladoton Oyemi. And maybe Wale is trying to get my attention and maybe everybody is unmuted automatically. Oh, sorry, everybody's muted automatically. And Wale is trying to get my attention, and then you mute that person, not knowing that that's not me. So I'm just putting some examples of how personal data actually, means a lot and should be protected. Some other examples we have, um, your signature, your job title. So this is another personal information or personal data that can be used to identify you, because when you come to OLX community and you're asking for maybe the project manager or the community leader or the community manager, there is a certain person that is identified by that title. So you can see that that's actually personal data too, because it's an information that relates to a person that can be identified directly or indirectly. So all these are, further ways for you to understand what personal data is. Let's look at other examples where you have your health records. So people get sensitive when it comes to health records because this information, when it gets to like public knowledge, can generate some level of bias against them or some prejudice against them. For example, we are all Nigerians, truth be told, and I would, bring it down, like bring it home right now, where you're in a bus and for some reason you just found out that the person sitting beside you had COVID during the lockdown period. Like everyone will just feel somehow, even though COVID has passed. Nobody really has COVID so much anymore, or it's not something. Maybe you've even taken the vaccine. You've taken the vaccine, but you know that the person beside you has COVID. There's just a way that you're just trying to gather yourself together and ensure that maybe the person doesn't just open their mouth or sneeze or do one funny thing that that will just put you in jeopardy. So you see that health information is something that the law actually categorized as sensitive because of the level of bias it will generate against a person. So even though I say that it's able to generate some level of bias against a person, that's not why, for example, within the Data Protection Act, which I will still talk about, there are some categories of personal data that is deemed as sensitive. So even if you feel like, oh, if this information gets to public, I don't want people knowing this about me, you feel like it's going to generate bias. But if the law doesn't categorize it as sensitive, it is not going to be sensitive. And one very good example is financial data. It's an irony, but the law doesn't actually categorize your financial information as sensitive. Some of what the law categorizes as sensitive is your health data, your biometric data, that's your fingerprint, your iris scan, your trade affiliation, your political belief, your sexual orientation. So there are about 7 of them. Your religious affiliation as well. The law has categorized them as sensitive, and that's just because that's what the law says. And if you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because in Africa, there are about 54 countries in Africa, yes, 54 or 55. There's often that argument, but let's just say 54 countries. Um, about 39 of them, I think over 39, but let's just say 39 of them have actually passed the data protection laws. And if you check the data protection laws, you find out that there are some differences in, some of the provisions, some of which might be the categorization of sensitive personal data. So some laws might identify some things as sensitive, but the Nigerian law might not. So in the Nigerian context, the financial data is not sensitive. Another data that is not sensitive, but which we can even now argue that it's supposed to be sensitive. Why is it not sensitive? It's criminal history. So the law also doesn't categorize criminal history as sensitive personal data. So that means the level of protection for which sensitive personal data would get is different from the level of protection for which ordinary personal data is going to get. So I already mentioned that some of the categorization which the law has put as sensitive include your health data, your biometric data, your religious affiliation, your political belief, your trade association. It's not so common in Nigeria, the importance of trade association, but it's more common in other parts of the globe. Then another one is your sexual orientation and I said there are seven of them. I'm not sure how many I've counted, but pretty much. So all of that you will find in the Nigerian Data Protection Act. So every other information aside from the seven categories in the um in the law is categorized. The seven is categorized as sensitive. So everything that falls within that category, there's an extra level of caution or extra level of attention that should be, put in place before you share that data with anybody and before anybody collects that data or any organization collects that data from you. So when you're signing up on an application or you're filling a form and they're asking you for your genotype, for your blood group, there's actually a reason for you to ask them that why do they need to collect that data? Every data they collect, actually, there's a need for them to notify you of why they're collecting those information or that information. But when it comes to the category of sensitive personal data, for example, you go to buy a new SIM and they have to scan your fingerprints, there is actually an extra level of protection or extra level of caution that should be taken to or paid attention to when they collect information of that category. So, summary is that personal data is any information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual directly or indirectly. An additional one within the Nigerian context is the person has to be alive. So if it's the personal data of a deceased person, the data protection obligations actually cease or are not as stringent because data protection actually relates to information that relates to an identified or identifiable natural person who can be identified. So I added natural person because it deals with individuals, which is already in the definition that I mentioned. It has to be an individual. It cannot be a company or an organization. So if you have like some legal knowledge, you will know that we have natural persons and artificial persons. So it has to be a natural person. That is someone who is alive and breathing, that can be identified directly or indirectly. So that's that about what personal data is. So what then is data protection? Looking at all the personal data identifiers which we have, talked about, the examples which we have shared, data protection refers to the safeguards that you put in place as an organization to ensure that that data is not misused or abused. So data protection obligations are things that are required of organizations that process personal data, of which at the beginning I said that these organizations are typically in the categories of data controller or data processor. Okay, so we have Sulaiman or Suleiman. I'm not sure the pronunciation because it's typically EIC, but this one is A. So let's say Suleiman. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Suleiman, who works as HRBP. I'm not sure of the scope of your work, but if it's a B2B, you might not process as much personal data of the public people, that's some natural persons. But if it's a B2C, then you have customers who come to you for maybe consult or whatever. But let's assume that it's a B2B because typically most consulting organizations are B2B. That means it's a business to business kind of service that is rendered. So in this case, you would have access to personal data of employees because we're not looking at customer data, we're looking at employee data. That's data within the organization. So that means you have a responsibility to ensure that the data of the employees is processed in a way that there is no abuse or misuse of the personal data. And also, you need to let them know why you're processing their personal data, typically through a document that is called a privacy notice. Um, Most of us will be familiar with either a privacy notice or a privacy policy. If you go onto any website or you download an application, they will tell you that, oh, you can read our terms of use here, or you can read our privacy notice here. So a privacy notice is an information that informs the data subject or the individual whose data you want to process about why you're processing the personal data, how you're processing it, who you're sharing it with, the safeguards you're going to put in place to ensure that the data is well protected, and pretty much everything you would do with the personal data, and how long you'll be processing the data for, how they can reach out to you if they want to, exercise their data subject rights. We're still going to get to that at a later point. So why I explained this things I just mentioned is for you to begin to understand your role to in terms of data protection within your organization, and also understand your rights in terms of your personal data that is being used as a data subject. So when you are interfacing with other organizations, when you're sharing your data with maybe an application you downloaded or a website you logged on to, you are a data subject, and there are obligations that are expected of the organization in processing your data, and there are rights that you have to say, okay, this and this is how I want you to process my personal data. And why does this become important? It becomes important because the data protection framework, or the data protection laws of different countries have broken down the obligations, or broken down the concept of data protection to different metrics or different identifiers. So that means that there are different things that you need to do or you need to be aware of when it comes to data protection. The concept is broad, but there are a few things that I want us to talk about today. And these include the principles of data protection, the lawful basis for processing, and data subject rights. I'm not going to go too much into the first and the second one because it's more of organizational level. It's something that we need to pay attention to if we are, looking at it from the organizational side. But I already established that this training is going to look at it more from the data subject side, of which we all are in some capacity. So the principles of data protection is simply what it sounds like. They are the principles that regulate how data is processed. They are the principles that regulate how data ought to be protected. And there are about 7 of them, also 7 or 8, depending on the jurisdiction, but generally 7 of them. The principles include lawfulness, transparency, and fairness. That's the first one: lawfulness, transparency, and fairness. I didn't put them on the slide because I don't want to go too much into them. So I'm just going to mention them in passing. And it's something that we can always discuss at some other points if you want to maybe learn about it from the organizational side, what you need to know as an organization that's processing personal data. So the first one is lawfulness, transparency, and fairness. So that means that data should be processed lawfully, it should be transparent. That's why there's the need for the privacy notice, and should also be processed fairly. Then we have purpose limitation. That means that data processing should be limited to the purpose for which it was collected. So no, I should not be giving you my personal data because I want to maybe vote at the upcoming elections. And after 2 days, I'm receiving election campaigns, and I'm like, why are these people reaching out to me to vote for this person? That's not why I give them my personal data, but then that's just an aside example. Let's not go too much into that. So purpose limitation. So that means the reason for which the organization has disclosed that they've collected the personal data is the reason they should stick to. If they're going to use your personal data for another reason, they need to, notify you and rely on the necessary lawful basis for that. And in the case of consent, they need to get your consent before they can process your data for another reason which hasn't been disclosed before. But then there are different lawful bases for which they can rely on, but you have to be notified. Then there's data minimization. So this simply means that you collect only the data that you need to collect for the purpose which you've already stated. So for example, maybe I'm opening an application that helps me order food online. So I want to be able to order food from the comfort of my home, from anywhere in the country or any restaurants around. So as I'm signing up, they're asking for my name, my home address, my phone number, my email address. And maybe let's imagine that they ask for my genotype. And I'm wondering, why do you need my genotype, or why do you need my mother's maiden name for a food food delivery application or a food delivery processing. Why do you need my genotype? Why do you need my mother's maiden name? So data minimization says that you should only collect the data that is necessary to perform the action that you want to perform or the purpose which you've already stated. Then another one is storage limitation. Storage limitation means that don't just store the data till forever. Store the data for the period of time for which you need to store the data. So there has to be a stipulated duration of period or duration of time for which you are storing that personal data. So when I have opened that food delivery application I use as an example, so maybe I move out of the country and I don't want to use the application anymore, or the country where I moved to, the application doesn't exist or they don't have it's not one of their jurisdictions. So I have to delete the application. So before I delete the application, I would reach out to their contact address. Typically, it's supposed to be a data protection officer email address. So I'm either reaching out to the DPO address and saying that, dear this and this application, I want you to delete all the information you have about me. So they would let me know that, okay, my request to delete my data has been noted, and my data is going to be deleted maybe after this duration of time, which they have already stipulated. So there must be a retention period or a storage limitation period. So that's another principle of data protection. So I'm going to stop on principles. I'm going to stop at those 4 principles I already explained and get briefly to lawful basis. Lawful basis simply means what is the basis for which your data is being processed. So many of us are familiar with the concept of consent. So when you want to sign up on a platform, they're asking you that tick here to consent to receiving marketing emails, or would you like to receive our weekly newsletters? Tick here to consent, or tick this box to consent, or type I consent in this particular box. So the most common one is consent, but consent is not the only basis for which data can be processed. Other lawful bases include contractual obligations. So if I have a contract with an organization for a particular service that they want to provide to me, so I have agreed that, oh, we're entering into contract for this purpose. I'm entering into contract for you to for me to pay you, and you deliver food to me. So if there's a contract of that nature, you can process my data on the basis of contractual obligation. Another one is legal obligation. So it's possible that you've given your data to a particular organization and they are processing it on the legal obligation that is already stipulated by law. One common example here is KYC. So when you go to a bank to open an account, they have the legal obligation to know their customers. So legal obligation is another basis for which data can also be processed. Another one is what's it called? Legitimate interest. Legitimate interest is a very tricky one, but legitimate interest simply means that I am processing your data because it's in legitimate interest of my business to process your personal data. So that one is complex. I'm just going to stop at that for legitimate interest, but organizations can rely on legitimate interest after carrying out some tests called the balancing test to ensure that the interest of the business does not is not overridden by the interest of the data subject. So that means my right as a data subject or as the owner of the personal data, if it overweighs your right as that business owner, you cannot rely on legitimate interest. But there is more to that about legitimate interest. So that's another lawful basis for which organizations can rely can say that they're processing your personal data. Another one is vital interest. But vital interest means that it's in the vital interest of that person. So if it's a life and death situation, for example, someone suddenly starts convulsing on a bus or has maybe a panic attack, what's that thing called? An asthma attack on a bus. So in that case, the person has a crisis, an health crisis, and it's in the vital interest of that person that the data is processed. So the person can be rushed to the hospital, or you can carry out some tests on that person. So that way you're processing their personal data without necessarily getting their consent, but because it's in their vital interest for you to process their data in that manner, so you can rely on vital interest for that processing. That's four. Let me just give you one more. Public interest. Public interest means that it's in the interest of the entire public for you to process data. So that means that in the case of COVID, you are saying that you want to process the personal data of Nigerians because it's in the public interest of everyone that you actually process their personal data in that manner. So that's just a few. That's not all, but those are some of the lawful bases for which you can rely on before processing personal data. So every organization must have a lawful basis for each processing of personal data that they carry out. So when I say each, I mean that they cannot just say that, oh, we're relying on consent. So every processing that we do is based on your consent. So you have to give us consent for us to do everything that we do. No, you can't do that. Each processing has to be x-rayed, and you have to know which lawful basis you are relying on for that processing. And this becomes important, speaking from the organizational side, where you have to actually have like a complete record, because remember that one of the principles I mentioned is transparency. So you have to have a full record of your processing activities, stating what the processing you're carrying out, what's the personal data that is being processed, who has access to the personal data, what's the lawful basis for which you're processing that personal data, what's the storage period or the retention period, and pretty much every other thing that you keep on the record of processing activities. But then that's just all about lawful basis of processing. So now to the one that really concerns us today, data subject rights. Data subject rights is simply as it says, your rights as a data subject. And I've reiterated that a data subject is anyone whose data is being processed. So if you have personal data, of which we all do, because everyone on this call has a name, everyone on this call has an address, everyone on this call has identifiable markers that we can use to relate to this person, or we can use to identify this person. So if I suddenly say that, oh, I feel like Awode Suleiman is a man. So that way I have, said something about Awode Suleiman. I have also mentioned that his gender, maybe if he's a man or if he identifies as a man, then that's also personal data. If we say that, oh, Awode Suleiman works at this and this organization, that's also his personal data. So having understood what personal data really is, or the entire scope of personal data, what then is what then are our rights relating to our personal data? Or how can we ensure that the data is being processed the way we want it to be processed? Because if you say it's my personal data, that means I should be able to determine what is done with it and how all of this is done, and at different times. So I'll come back to this, which is just a few provisions of the Nigerian Data Protection Act I want us to pay attention to. But some of it are the things I already mentioned, the principles of data protection. You can see it as section 4. If you just go online and search Nigeria Data Protection Act 2023, it's a public document, so you can have access to it. So go to section 4, you see all the principles of data protection is highlighted, and you also find out all the lawful bases that you can rely on for processing as an organization. So if your role within your organization requires you or gives you access to a lot of personal data, you need to understand this more extensively. So I would implore you to actually go and check it out, or reach out to me later. We can have a more comprehensive conversation about it. So the one that concerns everyone on this call is section 34 and section 34 to section 38. So, and this outlines our rights as data subjects, everything that you can do with regarding to your personal data. And we're going to talk more about it in just a moment. Then section 46 allows you to reach out to the regulatory authority. That is the Nigeria Data Protection Commission, the NDPC, Nigeria Data Protection Commission, to reach out to them and complain that, oh, this organization is handling my personal data in this way. I have tried to tell them not to, process my personal data in this way, or I have tried to exercise my data subject rights, but they are not responding, or they are not complying, or they are not responsive in a timely manner, because there's a time frame for them to actually respond to you. So I want to report them. I want to complain to the regulator. And by the time we are done going through all of our rights, you're going to be amazed at how much power you have as a data subject, and how much you should, exercise your rights pretty much. Because you now see that there are so many violations that are occurred, or that are, that happen on a day-to-day. Then you would also know what adjustments to make within your organization, so that someone doesn't go and exercise their right to complain against you. So now let's talk about the data subject's rights. So there are, how many is this? There are nine of them within the Nigerian context. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, as I said. Within the Nigerian context, there are nine of them. So let's start with the right to access. Right to access simply means that I want to know what personal data you have of me. So I'm reaching out to maybe this social media platform. For example, I use LinkedIn a lot. I think that's the highest, that's my most used social media platform. Um, yeah. Yeah, I think it's my most used social media platform. So I reach out to LinkedIn because there's actually a place where you would find the privacy notice of how they process your personal data. You would also find your privacy settings, which you can adjust. You can restrict access to what is being done with your personal data on LinkedIn. And I would speak more about that later. But I reached out to them on LinkedIn saying that I want to know all the information you have about me. So that means I'm exercising my right to access. And LinkedIn has the responsibility to actually, pull up all the information. So they would share my name, my email address if I have it on LinkedIn, my educational background, depending on the how much I have put up on LinkedIn, my connections, those I follow, those that follow me, um, the articles I've posted on LinkedIn, my organization that I'm affiliated to, everything that concerns me on LinkedIn, they are going to share it with me. So that way, I know what information. So I know to what extent I have shared my personal data. Because oftentimes you would find out that you're getting some ads that you didn't sign up for, or you don't remember signing up for. So sometimes you can just, play with it. Go to any social media platform that you use and try to exercise your right of access and see how much personal data you have actually shared on that platform, and see how much of yourself you've actually put out there, because everything you share with them, depending on the level of access you have given them, some of them they can share with third parties, some of them it's in the public domain, and some of them it's restricted to just you. So try to exercise your right to access and see how much information you would actually pull up. If you are in other jurisdictions outside Nigeria, you would know the importance of this much more, because the GDPR, and I'm adding this context because I know that I've seen a couple of people who are dialing in from UK. So the GDPR has been in existence since 2018 and is very strict. So within the European context and pretty much everywhere in the US, okay, not everywhere in the US, but most countries, most states in the US and most countries in Europe, the standard is very high. So organizations pay every attention or serious attention to data protection, because the GDPR within Europe and also other US laws on data protection, they have given you all these rights, of which Nigeria has also given us this right, but compliance level within Nigeria is still coming up, and that's it's progress. So let's appreciate that. And with everyone on this call, getting more informed about it, we can also now take that into our organization. And then when someone tries to exercise any of these rights, we can know how to attend to it, and we can also pay more attention to it. Another one is right to data portability. This simply means that I want to transfer my data from one organization to another. So some of us might be familiar with that advert that was trending some years back, where you want to switch from maybe Etisalat to MTN, as it was then called. But you want to still retain your number. So for example, if my phone number is this, maybe 080 da 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 da, and I want to still have that number because I have a lot of people that already know me by that contact. It's my business line. So I don't want to change my number. But I feel like this particular network is not so great within my environment. And I already paid for my house. So I don't have intention to move anytime soon. I own the house or I built the house. So I'm going to be there for a very long time. I'm just giving an example of why you might want to put or change your number or change your network. So I want to change from this network provider to another network provider. So I can reach out to this network provider telling them to, port all my information from their, servers to the other network provider. So they're going to deliver the information in a way that the other network provider can use it to also set up my profile, and I can begin using their platform very seamlessly. So the intention of this, right, I believe, is to ensure the seamless transfer of personal data so that when you want to maybe you leave Lagos, Nigeria to another part of the country and you want to continue your health, you want to continue your health checkup, or you want to continue that surgery you already started or that procedure you already started, you don't have to, go through the same test you already did. They have to now take your MRI again, do your X-ray again, take your blood test again. It's just cumbersome and stressful. So you can ask the hospital that you were using in Lagos to transfer all your data, everything. And why it's a right means that it is something that is innate to you. It is your due. So like they cannot say they're not going to oblige you, or they're tired, or they don't want you to go. Some of them will tell you that, oh, we are sorry to lose you. Sorry about that, but I want to move for whatever reason that I have decided. So you can now choose to exercise your right to data portability to move all your information from whatever provider you were using before, whether health provider, telecoms provider, or anything, pretty much anything, and move it to another provider. So if I want to move from the food application I mentioned earlier, and I want to move to another application. So it's their responsibility to provide that information in a format or in a modem that the other organization can also use that information to set up my profile. So that's your right to data portability. And I'm sure that not many people actually knew about this right before. Then another one is right to rectification of data. And I'll give a very classic example with this one, especially relating to what's the word? To government parastatals in Nigeria. So you've registered for whatever ministry or whatever registration that you're required to do. And you suddenly realize, very common with me, actually, that's something I've experienced several times. Still, I don't know why or what gives people the impression that Oladotun is just a masculine name. I hear it like 70% of the time when I introduce myself that, oh, you're a lady. And I'm like, yes, I'm a lady. Oladotun is unisex. Sorry about that. But most people will tell me that most of the Oladotuns they have met are guys. And I'm like, okay, nice to meet you. But then what I'm trying to point out is the fact that then I often find on my record, they've already registered my name and they put male. And I'm like, why? Why is it showing male? Because I'm a full-blown lady. Why is it showing male? What gives you the impression? Why didn't you find out if you're not sure? So I can now always choose to exercise my right to education of data and see that I want to correct this information about me. I am actually a female, and so I wanted to change that information. Oftentimes they might ask for some kind of proof to show that you actually what you say or that data you want to change is actually accurate. But as a matter of best practice, and I'm going to just keep adding like best practices in between as we go on. As a matter of best practice, they should not collect any information they did not already have before. So for example, if it's let me use example of maybe NIMC. If I register with NIMC, obviously I walked in to do like my biometric inform data collection. So it's hardly possible for them to actually make me to keep my record as male instead of female. But let's imagine in the worst case scenario that they actually do. So I am supposed to present them with some information that I already presented before to show that I am actually who I say I am, and I am what I'm changing my information for is actually correct. So because of security reasons, they also have to ensure that they verify. But the verification process should not involve collecting more data than what you already collected before. So remember I mentioned data minimization before. Oftentimes you find that organizations don't comply with this, but I want you to know as a matter of best practice that when you want to verify the identity of one of your data subjects, or when an organization wants to verify your identity, they should not collect any data they didn't collect before. So if they collected maybe my photograph and my name, my mother's maiden name, and any other information they collect. And now they're asking me to provide maybe my BVN or my NIN if they didn't collect that before, or my voters identification number, or maybe my passport ID number, and they didn't collect that before, or it doesn't even, of course, we already spoke about purpose limitation. So these are things that we should raise our eyebrows against when we see it, because it's not best practice, and we should also not do it within our organization. But then that simply just explains right to rectification of data. And some of these rights, they have like some restrictions. I don't want to overcomplicate it, so I'll just say that some of them are not, what's the word? They're not absolute rights. An absolute right is a right you can exercise at any point in time, however way, however manner you want to exercise it. Some of them are not absolute. That means some of them, there are restrictions to exercising them, or there are things that have to be put in place before you can exercise them. So I just want to add that, information out there. Right to lodge a complaint, that's pretty straightforward. I already mentioned that the Nigerian Data Protection Act provides for you to actually lodge a complaint with the regulatory authority. So you have that as a right. So if you reach out to an organization to exercise any of these rights on the screen and they're not obliging you, you actually have a right to tell them that I'm going to report you. I didn't tell you that, but then you have the right to actually report them, and feel free to actually exercise it, because the more we do it, the more organizations pay attention to, data protection, and the more we actually have a better framework within our Nigerian landscape. So please feel free to actually exercise it. Then the right not to be subjected to automated decision making simply says that whatever processing is being done has to have some level of human input. So, and this is particular for the HRs on the call, or the HRs that we have here. You should never use fully automated hiring platforms. So whatever hiring platform you use should be one that allows you to have some level of human input, so that the bias against the applicants is reduced, because they have a right not to be subjected to fully automated decision making. So they have a right to reach out to you if they feel like your hiring process was completely automated. They have a right to reach out to you and let you know that you can't do that. That makes it unfair for them. That prejudices them completely. And the law says that they should not be subjected to fully automated decision making. Then some other ones that are similar, right to withdraw consent. So where you have given consent, you can withdraw it. For example, marketing emails, you can click here to unsubscribe. Right to restrict processing. You can tell an organization, okay, I want you to not process my personal data in this manner anymore. And one classic example here is social media platforms, where you can actually go there and either fully delete your account or disable your account. So that way your data is not visible for a period of time that you don't want it to be visible, just because you just chose to. So there are levels of restrictions that you can actually put around the processing of your personal data, right to object to processing. So all of these are rights that you have as data subject, and feel free to ask any question about any of these rights that I've explained. I want to, just tell you more a bit about what I do within my organization, and maybe if it's maybe necessary for anybody, is something that you can always reach out to me about, and we'll talk. So I work with Tech Hive Advisory as a policy analyst, as I said at the beginning, and my organization is a consulting organization around the intersection of business, law, and technology. And pretty much what this means is that we advise organizations across this field, and we are able to, provide services in different areas, particularly data protection, startup advisory. We also have a regulatory intelligence team, means that we're able to tell you what's happening in different regions real time. So we're able to provide intelligence reports on industries where you might have businesses, and we let you know in real time. So maybe there is a law that is passed today, or a regulation that came out yesterday, or the government of Somalia is saying this about data protection or about technology use, and they said it yesterday or said it this morning. We're able to provide those kind of intelligence report to you. We also have a cybersecurity team where, we can either train your organizations to improve your cybersecurity measures. We can, help you comply with ISO standards and NIST standards. We can also, help ensure that everything that relates to cybersecurity within your organization is up and tight. Then we also have our AML advisory, financial advisory, advisory around emerging technologies, research, intellectual property, and then compliance as a service. So these are some of our services, and we've been in the business for over 5 years, and our aim is to actually ensure that we're able to foster a safer use of technology across jurisdictions, and a safer use of technology and compliance that is internationally recognized. So pretty much ensuring that we're able to assist your organization to do what you need to do. So that's it from my end.